Hello students, welcome to week 1, chapter 1, side 10, general psychology. In this chapter, we will talk about the general concepts of psychology. As an introduction to general psychology, you should know about the research method and basic concepts of psychology. First topic is psychology at work. Learning outcomes are define the science of psychology. What is psychology? Describe the subfield of psychology and list the major specialists for working in the field of psychology. So what is psychology? When you are talking about psychology, you are talking about the science. You are talking about in working in laboratories. You are talking about teaching and considering the major concepts of scientific method for assessment about the human behaviors and mental processes. So psychology is a science because you can find psychological courses and many different psychological degrees in universities. Approved universities will supply you many psychological courses and psychological programs in major academic levels of Bachelor of Science or Bachelor of Art, Master of Science or Master of Art, and also PhD of Psychology and a special field in America which is called PSY, Psychological Doctorate. So what is psychology? Psychology is the scientific study, scientific investigation of behaviors and mental processes. So you can find these elements. At first, psychology is scientific study. When you are talking about scientific study, you are talking about the scientific method. And it is a study. It is not only about the theories, about mind, theories about behavior. It's a study, it's an investigation. And two major parts of psychology can we consider. One, behaviors. Two, mental processes. Behavior is what you can see, it is observable, and mental processes, it is something what you cannot observable directly, but you can measure it with your tools like questionnaires, like for example now some parts of imaging, medical imaging like MRI or CT scan, you can find some facts about the mental processes that human beings experience in themselves and describe, predict, explain behavior and mental process using the scientific method. At first, you should know, how can we gather information about the world? We can gather information about the world. We can collect data about the world in three major methods. One, when you experience something inner you, you cannot repeat it for yourself intentionally, sometimes accidentally. It will repeat it or not. But you cannot repeat it again in you, re-experience it again uh, intentionally. But you had some experiences about it. It is called intuition. And this type of gathering information about the world, internal or external world, is called mysticism. Mysticism is an intuitive experience. Second part is gathering information about the rules of the world by rationality, by thinking wisely, by correct questioning. This type of gathering information and finding the laws, finding the facts of the world by rationality, by logical thinking is called philosophy. So in philosophy, you can repeat the logics behind your, for example, discussions. And other people can find your logics, can find the rationality and understand it. It is repeatable and it is understandable, but it is not observable because it is about your mind, your rationality, your thinking method. And the third method, especially in the last 200 years, is science. Science is gathering information and finding and formulating those information in some models which are observable and measurable. So observation and measurement are the major components of science. When we are talking about scientific method, we are talking about observation and measurement. Because of that, at the end of the 19th century, as we will see in the next PowerPoints, at the end of the 19th century, psychology entered to science by using the tools in laboratory for uh, seeing, observing, and measuring the psychological facts and the components. The scientists of psychology, scientists of mind, or sometimes neurologists, sometimes psychiatrists, sometimes psychologists, wanted to know about the facts of life by observational and measurable tools. What are the subfields of psychology? It's very beautiful to use the psychology in different aspects of your life. When you say psychology is the science of the scientific study of behaviors and mental processes, every concept you enter in this definition, you have the psychology of that subject. For example, we say development is mean change, change in whole life, in lifespan. So when you are talking about the changing of behaviors and mental processes in life, in your lifespan, you are talking about developmental psychology. Next one. We can find some abnormal behaviors in people. When you are studying scientifically the abnormal behaviors and abnormal mind processes, it is called abnormal psychology. And when you want to find some therapies for those abnormal behaviors, it is called clinical psychology. When you want to know about the effects of society on your behaviors or mental processes, it is called social psychology. When you want to know why we have these types of behaviors in contrast with the other species, or these types of mental processes, you are talking about evolutionary psychology. When you want to know how our fixed and relatively consistent behaviors and mental processes shape in ourselves before the age of 18, we are talking about personality psychology. And for example, cross-cultural psychology, what are the processes and mental processes and behaviors that which are not related to just one specific culture. And cognitive psychology, how our cognition, how our thought, how our beliefs shape our mental processes, and vice versa, our mental processes have some affects, for example, like emotion affects on our thinking, in our rationality is cognitive psychology. Health psychology, my PhD is about health psychology. When you want to know about the relationship between your mind and body, for example, in asthma, in diabetes, in AIDS, in cancer, what are the psychological components? What are the psychological factors that we can consider, for example, for adapting with the end stage of cancer, or with adapting for new eating behaviors after diagnosing of diabetes, or for have something, some new behavior, some new arrangement in mind or mental processes for coping with, for example, obesity or heart attack and other parts. This is called health psychology. But working at psychology, as you know, now about 200,000 psychologists in the US, twice as many women as men, 16% for racial minority groups, and most have doctoral degree, PhD or society, as we talk about it, while some have master's degree, and psychologists are different from psychiatrists. Also, we know some general concepts for differentiation between psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, coaches, psychiatric nurses, and social workers. So coaches and mentors are the last field added to not always mental health professionals. One of my job is life coaching, I know, but many of colleagues in coaching, they are not from the field of psychology. Sometimes they have only a high school diploma. So we cannot consider coaching psychology or life coaching, sorry, as a mental health professional. But somebody like me that from before entering to coaching has some degrees, like for example, I have PhD of health psychology. After that, we can work in coaching, in life coaching, executive coaching, performance coaching, spiritual coaching, and other parts, other fields of coaching. We can consider it as a mental health. But generally, coaching is not a mental health proficiency. So what are the difference between psychologists and psychiatrists? Psychiatrists are specific physicians. They have some specific knowledge on the major parts of your brain, of the chemicals involved your behaviors, of the biological aspects of your mental processes, for example, about the medication, about the hormones, about the neurotransmitters, about your nervous system, and also about your genetic parts that can have affect, a very profound effect on your behavior. And they use many biological treatments for confronting with mental disorders. Clinical psychologists, especially the special psychologists who work with mental processes, clinical psychologists work only with the mental and psychological tools, not with the, for example, medication, biological tools. But psychiatrists can use, and most of them use, biological approach to for treatment the psychological problems. The science involved learning outcome. It is explain the roots of psychology, discuss today's perspective on psychology, apply psychology to your life, and summarize psychology key issues and controversies. You see here Wilhelm Wundt, the father of modern and scientific psychology. For example, you can find in the writings of Aristotle some general aspects to human soul. It is the science of soul, not science of mind, not science of self, not science of spirit. Also spirit and souls in major approaches to psychology. We don't have any formal word like soul or spirit, but we have ego, we have self, and we have science of self also. Wilhelm Wundt began the first psychological laboratory 1879 in Leipzig, Germany. It is the trigger point of psychology as a science in laboratory. And one major part of psychology is related to animal psychologists. And he talked about structuralism. He talked that a structure is more important than function and as a whole perspective on psychology. As you know, structuralism, the founder of structuralism is Wilhelm Wundt. And functionalism, other aspects for psychology is functionalism that you can use, for example, other parts of human being for this part of talking about the concepts of our mind or concepts of our different parts of life. Let me check it, sorry. Yes. Structuralism focuses on uncovering the fundamental components of consciousness, thinking, and also about other kinds of mental states and activities. Let me share with you. It's here. Structuralism focuses on uncovering the fundamental mental components of consciousness, fundamental mental components. We are talking about the structure of mind, thinking, and other kinds of mental states and activities. Introspection and extrospection are the major parts of structuralism. Looking in yourself, inner yourself, and find the major components of your mind is called introspection. Wundt and other structuralists used procedure called introspection, in which they presented people with a stimulus such as a bright green object or a sentence printed on a card and asked them to describe in their own words and as much detail as they could what they were experiencing. We offer you some stimulus and ask you about your feeling, about your inner experience, about your mind syntax or mental syntax. And after that, we call it introspection. Inspection, as you know better than me, inspection is the prefix we use it for looking at something, which is spection. And introspection is looking inside yourself. Other parts, in the opposition part of introspection is extrospection. We offer some stimulus to you and don't ask you about your inner experience. We observe you, what are your body and observable and social and behavioral, observable and measurable reaction and changes. It is called extrospection. Other things is functionalism, an early approach to psychology that concentrated on what mind does, the function of mental activity, not the structure of the mental activity, and the role of behavior in allowing people to adapt to their environment. You see, we are talking about the beginning years of 20th century with the highest growth in physics and chemistry. They are the major soft, not soft, hard sciences. And everybody wanted to know about the physics and chemistry and science as a science, and also other fields that they wanted to offer them as scientific fields. They wanted to say that yes, we can have some observation and measurement on the topics we want to work on. Because of that, we can see here functionalism that talk about the functions and role of behavior in allowing people to adapt to their environment, not only about the inner part and introspection of your mind, of your personal experience. The other movement in psychology was Gestalt. Gestalt at first was not from psychology, it is from philosophy. In philosophy, Gestalt is means holistic approach to life or a whole, multidimensional, perfect, completed parts. These are called these are called Gestalt, as you see, Gestalt psychology. And after that, in this philosophy, entered to psychology as a very, very important and very motivating approach to human mind. Because in this very deep philosophical mind about the human mind, we can find some roots of looking at the deepest parts of personality, as you will see on the other parts in the future about the psychodynamic and psychoanalysis. You will find something that, yes, you can find it here, that many roots of our mind is related to our unconsciousness. Also, Gestalt is not about unconsciousness, but it is about the totality and whole of our personality. An approach to psychology that focuses on the organization of perception and thinking in a whole sense rather than on the individual elements of perception. It wants to know the final summary, the final result of your perception, not, for example, only about your visual perception or about your auditory perception and about your beliefs about the perception, beliefs on your, for example, auditory and visual and other parts of sensation and perception. Um, you can find some somatic body-related experience in the beginning years of the 20th century. Why? I said to you, because it was the uh, beginning years of 20th century and the hard sciences like physics and chemistry were developing so fast and so good. Because of that, these concepts about the holistic approach and total approach and um, whole looking at the human mind was very important. But where are we now? In Harvard, in MIT, Stanford, in other parts of psychology and psychiatric and mind related and brain related and knowledge related aspects of life or aspects of science. Where we are now. At the end of the 20th century, we know that we should work on brain and we should work on the neural circuits of brain, and we should know about the nervous system, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and other parts related to our body in neurons. Why? Because we began not at the end of the 20th century, at the second half of the 20th century, we began to work with robots, with computer science. And one of the most interesting things that we wanted to know, and also we want to know up to now, we haven't find the final answer up to now, was how consciousness created, how can we create consciousness in robots? How can we create, for example, mind in robots? How can we create judgment in robots? It is very important for us to know about these concepts. Because of that, a field was disciplined in combination of psychology, biology, genetics, anatomy, physiology, medicine, computer science, and other parts related to creating, for example, electronic science or IT science for a new field so-called neuroscience. Neuroscience is not neurology. Neuroscience is not neuropsychology. Neuroscience is the science of neurons. What does it mean? It means that when you want to work on neurons and work with neurons, you should know something more than the structure of the neurons. You should know something more than the chemicals and chemistry of how the functions of neurons. You should know about the wisdom of neurons, how neurons work together. The approach that views behavior from the perspective of the brain, the nervous system, and other biological functions. Psychodynamic. Psychodynamic, the approach based on the view that behavior is motivated by unconscious inner forces over the individual has little control. Psychodynamic um, basically began with Sigmund Freud, at the end of the 19th century and the beginning in the starting years of 20th century. Freud died 1939, the year World War II began. And at first it was called psychoanalysis. And after that, other comrades, other co-workers, other scientists come with Freud and added some specific knowledge, some specific interpretation to the basic view of Freud about human beings, and it was called psychodynamic. And after that, we entered to behavioral science or behaviorism by J.B. Watson. The approach suggests that observable, measurable behavior should be the focus of the study. We talk about it because, like other sciences, we wanted to know about the observable and measurable mathematical important components of behavior, which was called behavior. At first, it was the movement of behaviorism by J.B. Watson in 1920, between 1920 and 1930. And at the end of the 60s and entering to 70s and also 80s, especially with B.F.S. Skinner, B.F.S. Skinner changed the science of behavior to science of behavior change, to science of behavior modification. Also, Skinner is not directly related to uh, behavior therapy. Behavior is something else different from behavior modification and behavior change. But the basic principles are the same for behavior therapy and behavior science and behavior change and behavior modification. So after that, after Skinner, some parts of, not after Skinner, at the same time with the Skinner, some scientists of psychology, especially some psychotherapists, started to work with behavior for changing the human life and also for working with other non-behavioral components to changing behavioral aspects of our life. That we can find some new fields in mind-related sciences like psychosomatic medicine, like behavioral medicine, and also finally in psychology we can find health psychology, looking at the different non-psychological, non-directly psychological aspect of our of the human being. So behaviorism just now has many subjects to talk about, many important subjects. For example, especially in California, we have many children with the autistic spectrum disorders, and applied behavioral analysis (ABA) is one of the greatest and most efficient approaches to work with these children. And all the applied behavioral analysis is related to behaviorism, to behavior modification. For example, how can we change other people's behavior? It was a hot topic. So you can find some good movies in cinema about the truth or not truth of behaviorism. Sometimes people say and thought that yes, we can change anything, but by the principles of behaviorism. Also, it is rejected. Not anything, everything, but you can change many things with the principles of behavior. The major problem is that you can change only at the shallow level of behaviorism and shallow level of observable actions, observable behaviors. We only with the major principles and basic principles of behavior, you cannot change anything in depth. Yes, because you are working at the surface. Not too bad. As a social being, not too bad. Why not? As an organization, why not? As a leadership, why not? As a manager, why not? But as a psychotherapist, many problems in the office of psychotherapy for treatment, there are not the topics of only shallow and very superficial problems. We can work on their feelings, on their cognitions, on their deep problems, and especially some problems of childhood. And we cannot find it so easily to work only with their behaviors. But behaviorism is also, up to now, is one of the greatest and one of the uh, one of the most popular approaches in psychology, especially in psychotherapy. After that, we found something new that it is very interesting that I am not pigeon, I'm not monkey, I'm not mouse. Why? There was and also there is a field, a basic field of psychology, so-called animal psychology. What does it mean? Animal psychology is a branch of psychology who works with animal to creating, to shaping behavior in them. For example, for circus or for using animal in homes. It is not only about the dogs and cats, about the pets, about the different animals, especially for circus. Based on the behavioral principles of mind or based on the principles of behavior. But I am not a pigeon. I am not a mouse. I'm not a rat. I'm a human being. And as a human being, I think about everything. And I have some interventions with my behaviors and other behaviors, not only based on, for example, conditioning for observational learning, based on my beliefs, based on my thinking, based on my interpretation. This part is called cognitive or cognition. So the next movement in psychology after psychodynamic and behaviorism was adding cognition rationality, beliefs, and other thinking, other parts of mind as a rational mind, as a cognitive mind, as a thoughtful mind was cognition. We added cognition to the major components of human behavior. So at first it is what cognitive science, now it is cognitive neuroscience. And in therapy and treatment, it is something different, not related to cognitive science or cognitive neuroscience. It is called cognitive therapy. And the combination of changing mind for changing behavior is the most validated approach in psychotherapy, which is called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a behavioral therapy, but the tools for changing the behavior is your cognition, is your rational thinking, rational beliefs or irrational beliefs, and your thought and your mind and other things, which is related to your rationality, to your wisdom, to your thinking. It is CBT. Everywhere, I think most of the psychotherapists basically work with CBT now. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Also, the hottest duration for CBT was about 20 years ago. After that, new approaches added to CBT, not separated from CBT, added to CBT. For example, we have now MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, or MBSR. Mindfulness is now very important in psychotherapy. MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, or acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, and other new approaches in acceptable positive psychology, which is a different part. New approaches to psychology has added to therapy and to analyzing and investigating the mental processes and behaviors. But at the end of 60, we can find a humanistic approach to psychology, which started with Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow was the same gentleman, was the same uh, good guy, was the same spirit in our world, which talk about hierarchy of needs. You know better than me about this hierarchy of needs, because hierarchy of needs is one of the most influential psychological theories which entered to the world of management, especially management and human resource management, and after that about business and sales. So uh, these great people like Carl Rogers, like Abraham Maslow, was the founder of a movement in psychology, so-called humanistic psychology. We talk about animal psychology. So what is this topic, humanistic psychology? Humanistic psychology is an approach that suggests that all individuals naturally strive to grow, naturally develop, and be in control of their lives and behavior. Humanistic psychology has a great emphasis on your responsibility in your life, your personal development, your future, and looking at the future of your life. Psychology helps us solve practical problems. For example, terrorism after 9/11 and social media. Cyber psychology is very important now. It's a very, very important approach to life just now, because you know social media has captured all aspects of our life. And autism spectrum disorder, especially in America, we talk about the applied behavioral analysis and eyewitness accounts of crime. There is a very specific, very, very specific field of psychology, so-called forensic psychology. Forensic psychology is the mental processes and behaviors, scientific studies of mental processes and behaviors, which can be criminal or not, a mental disorder. Um, I don't know, have you seen the movie 88 Minutes by Al Pacino? 88 Minutes is the story of a forensic psychiatrist, not psychologist, but it's something near to forensic psychologist. Al Pacino is a forensic psychiatrist, and he has some problems in the movie, and you can see the movie. But at the beginning of the movie, he is the instructor of forensic psychiatry in university, and one of his students asked him that what is the difference between crime and mental disorder? And he answered, free will. Free will. The difference between crime and mental disorder is free will. If you have free will to do something, you are responsible, you are accountable. So it's crime. It is uh, out of law, it is crime. If you do something wrong for your society, even killing other people, but you don't have any control, you don't have any will to do something with free will, okay, you are hazardous, you are dangerous, you have some mental problems, but you are not criminal. So this field of work with criminal people is called forensic medicine, forensic psychology, forensic psychiatry, and other parts. Racism in different courses in the course of MBA, DBA, and also bachelor degree. In many courses, we will talk about the racism and other discrimination, for example, based on nationality, based on geographical territory, based on ethnicity, based on religion, and also based on race. So racism is now uh, has a very big part of psychological studies, especially in the field of social psychology. It's one of the greatest and interdisciplinary between psychology, politics, sociology, and also biology. It's an interdisciplinary studying topic between different fields. One of the greatest of them is psychology. Life satisfaction and well-being, which is my proficiency, is about positive psychology. National Mental Health Institute, and as a part of National Health Institute. It is about mental health, but the major research grants is about mental disorders, not mental health. Because of that, after World War II, many veterans came back to home with the great mental problems. So the government decided to work on treatment of these mental disorders in their veterans because they were precious people for our nation as Americans. And after that, suddenly they understood that, yes, we know good knowledge, very, very good new knowledge about mental disorders, but not about the life satisfaction, not about the happiness, not about the talent finding. So these were the major objects of psychology. The major object was not treatment the mental disorders. Until the end of the 19th century, we didn't know any specific knowledgeable science-based, evidence-based knowledge about mental disorders. It was not our major issues. How we can we better than yesterday? How we can be more stronger? How we can be happier? What talents can we find in ourselves? What talents can we find in other people? Better life, life satisfaction, well being. These were the major topics of psychology at the roots, at the beginnings. Also, some studies, some approaches for psychotherapy and therapeutic approach to human mind and behaviors was there in that time. But the major parts about better man, better version of human being, not about only resolving the conflict, not about only the treatment of mental disorders. But because of World War II, the great grants, research grants, went to the parts of veteran and working mental disorders. So many psychologists switched from well-being and life satisfaction to mental disorders. So at the end of the 20th century, Martin E.P. Seligman, the president of APA in that time, APA means American Psychological Association, that he was and also he is now one of the greatest psychologists in the history of psychology. very, very famous theory of learned helplessness is coined by Martin E.P. Seligman. Learned helplessness. At the end of the 20th century, he found that we missed the major topic of psychology as a science for serving people. We are using the tax of the, for example, California taxes of the America for doing what? Only finding the problems of people and try to defining the problems and the best scenario finding some treatment. Okay, after that, major people are not don't have any mental disorders. Major people with major mental disorder. Everybody have some mental problems because we are human being. We are perfectly a man, not a perfect man. We are perfectly a man. Why not? We have some deficiency, we have some problems, but it is not the topic of treatment. It is not the topic of psychotherapy. Martin E.P. Seligman started positive psychology at the end of the 20th century when he was the president of APA. And after that, a serious movement in psychology, so-called positive psychology, started to work on the positive aspect of human being. It's a good news that a great portion, a big portion of positive psychology is related to positive leadership by Kim Cameron, the founder of the coiner of the phrase positive leadership, and also positive institutions. These are major important parts of positive psychology. Because of that, we know now that we should have some empirical evidences about the positive aspects of human life. Key issues, which is nature, heredity versus nurture in psychology, which is important, and conscious versus unconscious causes of behavior, and observable behavior versus internal and mental processes, and also free will choices versus determinism. Behavior is produced by factors beyond one's control, and individual differences versus universal principles. You can see here the issue of nature versus nurture. In neuroscience, we say that yes, it's important. Nature is very important in neuroscience. Heritage is very important. In cognitive science or cognitive psychology, we say both of them, nature and nurture, are both of them are important. And in behavioral or behaviorism approach, absolutely, we are talking about the training, about the education. We are talking about nurturing. And in humanistic, also we say we are social people. Love is very important. Hate is very important. Institutional organizations are very important. We talk about it as a nature being, natural being, as a nurturing being. Human beings are nurtured by the society and environment, by the parents, for example. And in psychodynamic, we talk about the nature, about the biology or by heredity. Consciousness versus conscious. In neuroscience, we talk about unconscious. In cognitive science, we talk about both of them. We accept some parts of conscious and some part of unconscious of our mind, our behavior, our thinking, our emotions, our interaction with other people. But in behaviorism and humanism, we talk about the conscious because we consider people are conscious about their actions, and because of that, they are responsible, accountable of their behaviors, especially in humanistic psychology and humanistic approach to existentialism and other parts of psychology. And finally, the basic concept of psychodynamic is unconscious. And observable behavior and internal mental processes are, in neuroscience, we talk about internal processes because we are talking about brain. And also in cognitive science and cognitive psychology and cognitive therapy, we are talking about your cognition, about your minds, about your beliefs. So we are talking about the internal parts of your mind. And also in humanistic, we are talking about passion, we are talking about compassion, we are talking about love, we are talking about intelligence and other parts. So these are internal parts. And finally, in psychodynamic, when we are talking about your unconsciousness, absolutely we are talking about your internal parts. Only in behaviorism, we talk about your external or observable parts. Free will versus determinism. This means in neuroscience, it's deterministic. Why? Because you are your brain in neuroscience. You are your body, especially your brain and nervous system. Also in behaviorism, it is absolutely determinism. Why? Because you are your behavior and your behavior is shaped by your environment, and you should do based on the conditioning on your life, on your conditioning of your life. And also in psychodynamic, absolutely you are, it is deterministic because you cannot change your previous life, especially your early childhood. But again, in humanism and in cognitive, in humanism, say when you are responsible, so you have free will. And in cognitive, we say yes, you had some habitual behavior because of habitual model of thinking, habitual attitude, rational or irrational attitudes, but you can change them. CBT and cognitive therapy talking about the changes of your behavior through changes your minds and beliefs and thinking. And what about individual differences and universal principles? In neuroscience, we talk, yes, the structure and the context, and the not content, but the structure and context of brain is something equal for all human beings, all healthy, relative healthy human beings all around the world. So we know that it is a universal matter. Also in behavioral, we say yes, some parts of are universal, for example, observational learning or conditioning, and some parts are not universal and very specific because of the difference of the culture. But in cognitive science and in humanism and in psychodynamic, in cognitive science and humanism, also again, we talk about individual because you are responsible and you can change yourself. Again, in your psychodynamic, we know that the emphasis on universal principles of psychology. The final part that I want to talk about it very shortly, it is about research in psychology. At first, you know that if you don't know anything about statistics and research method, you are not a scientist. If you don't know anything about statistics and research method, you cannot work with the science. If you don't know anything good about research method and statistics, you cannot find and understand the scientific facts. So I know many students in all different levels, in PhD, in master degree, even in bachelor degree, they don't like statistics and research method. They think that it is for university. Yes, it is for university. We expect you to understand all the materials in your field after ending the university. We expect you to understand all the materials related to your field. For example, if you are studying in business, we expect you to understand all the materials, all the texts, all the graphs in the field of business after graduation. For example, after undergraduation, after graduation, you should find something new in the text. Because of that, everybody who works, who studies, who is someone from the field of academic, from the field of university should know. It is necessary to know basic good science about statistics and research method. It is also for psychology. So we have general concepts of research method, but a specific concept for each field. For example, we have general concepts of research method, but research method for business, research method for marketing, research method for psychology, research method for medicine, different form, different content for the same form. Form is equal for all aspects of science, but the content is different. So very shortly we look at it because you have a complete course so-called research method. The scientific method is systematic acquiring knowledge and understanding about behavior and other phenomena. Science, systematically acquire knowledge is science. Step one, identify questions of interest. What is your interest? Uh, what is your question? What is your why? And two, formulate an explanation, theory on hypothesis. So how do you think about your question? What is your hypothesis about your question? What are the estimated future-oriented answer? You guess that yes, I guess that the answer will be this or that. And I want to research, to work on the possibility and probability of the answers. Carry out research designed to support or refute the explanation. No problem. Many scientists do many researchers without any acceptance, with a lot of rejection. Why? Because they have only some assumptions. They didn't do and they will not do their research to find their desired answer. They want to know and find the true answer, scientific facts, not desirable or undesirable. And step four, communicate the finding. Psychological research, the central focus of scientific method is research, theory, broad explanation, predicting phenomena of interest. It is the scientific and very acceptable definition of theory. What is hypothesis? Prediction stated in a testable way. The difference between hypothesis and theory is that when you have some hypothesis, you should have some tools for testing your hypothesis. The hypothesis testing is the step between your hypothesis or accepting or rejecting your hypothesis. In the middle part, you should have some test about the hypothesis. It is called hypothesis testing. And operational definition, this is very my favorite vocabulary, my favorite phrase is operational definition. You should have operational definition. If you cannot convert, you cannot change, you cannot create the operational definition out of your conceptual definition, you cannot work as a scientist, because many of your questions are at the level of concepts. And you cannot work with concepts as a scientist. You can work with concepts as an artist, as a philosophy, and other branches of science. Sometimes it's called human sciences, but honestly, they are not human sciences because they are not sciences. Science is something based on scientific method. If you can change your concepts, your conceptual definition to operational definition, that's good. Based on your definition of operational definition of your question, you can find or create or make some tools for testing your hypothesis. So operational definition is from a translation of hypothesis into measurable procedure. And one of the method is descriptive research, archival research, existing data, naturalistic observation, naturally occurring behavior, no intervention, only observation, and survey research. It is sample is ask question, you know about the survey, and case study, intensive investigation of an individual or a small group. It is very ordinary to have some case study, but before working with case study with one person, one individual, or a very small group, you should know about the criteria, how is suitable for your study. And correlational research is very important. Two sets of variables are examined to see if they are associated. We find two types of correlation, positive correlation and negative correlation. Positive correlation at the same severity, at the same time, without any causality. There is no cause and effect relationship. It is only about correlation. The same time, the same duration. And negative correlation is, for example, the same time with different in oppositional state of severity. And correlation does not show causation. It is, pay attention. Experimental research is the cause and effect relationship using formal experiments. Think about Wilhelm Wundt. We were talking about Wilhelm Wundt at the first PowerPoint. He was founder of experimental psychology. But why? Because he worked in laboratory, changing the variables, cause and effect relationship, and deliberately producing a change in one variable and observing the effects of that change on other variables. Experimental group, control group, independent variable, and dependent variable. that we will talk about them in their research method, but very shortly you should know some variable, you control them, you consider them as fixed, consistent, persistent with no change. It is called independent variable. And you can find some, this is called, sorry, dependent variable. And on the other hand, you can change some variable. It is independent variable. You change it. And also, you have some experiments on some people. It is called experimental group. And there is another group with the same criteria that you don't have any intervention on them. It is control group, and after you have a pre-test and doing something, an after test or post-test, and comparing between control group and experimental group, and you can find it here. Okay, it's so good to know about the critical research issues, and psychologists must follow strict ethical guidelines to protect research participants. It is very important. Protection from harm. You cannot do anything in your research that can harm yourself or others. Sometimes it is called about or animals, even animals. Privacy, because you are working with the inner part of people, and it should be private and confidential. It is very important in all aspects of psychology, psychotherapy, and other parts of psychology. Informed consent, it is very aware of what their participation will involve. Please watch the movie Stanford Prison Experiments. I think the movie is 2013, but the experiment is about 70s or 80s by Philip Zimbardo. In that time, Philip Zimbardo, I think, was the founder, was the president of APA. I'm not certain about it, but one of the greatest, one of the most, not hazardous, most bizarre experiments in the history of psychology, the Stanford Prison Experiment, and a movie made based on the story of a Stanford experiment, Stanford Prison Experiment, with that title, Stanford Prison Experiment 2013. You can find the ethical issues there. And debriefing and voluntary, and animals used in research. Research is ethically bound to minimize discomfort, illness, and pain, and to promote the psychological well-being whenever possible. So why use animals at all? Use animals because the harming to animals, we also think it is not ethical, I think. But uh, the harming to animal is lower cost for human being. Experimental bias, placebo, a false treatment such as a pill without any significant chemical properties or active ingredients, and double-blind procedure that out of the parts, not the experimenter and not the candidate, not the participant, doesn't know anything about the interventions that they have on each other. It is double-blind, but it is a single blind. I, as someone, as a scientist, know what I am doing, but you as my participant doesn't know anything about the experiments. So thank you giving your time for watching this video. In the next video, we will talk about the neuroscience as the second part of week, week one, and it is about chapter 2.